Hello and welcome to this interview. My name is Arif Sulimani and I am working as a journalist for Ung Media Sverige, young Swedish media, and I have the privilege to have Henrik here to do interview with him. So Henrik, you can please introduce yourself briefly, who you are and what you do, then I will begin with my questions, please.
Sure, thank you, Arif. Well, my name is Henrik Nordentoft and I am the head of the UNHCR's office in Stockholm that covers the Nordic countries and the Baltic states. And UNHCR is the United Nations Refugee Agency in charge of coordinating the response and protection of refugees worldwide.
Thank you, Henrik. So there was a seminar just before our interview and I listened to that. That was the role of the UN, is it being challenged or it is needed more than ever? So as of now that we are talking, approximately there are 100 million people who are displaced forcibly and they have left and abandoned their homes. So, and there are also millions of refugees. Why do people flee from their countries and abandon their homes?
Yeah, I think you're right to distinguish between forced displacement and people who are fleeing for other reasons. When we talk about forced displacement, we talk about refugees and internally displaced who have fled from very specific reasons. It's either civil war, it is atrocities, it can be violence that is not controlled, it's because of human rights abuses. So, there is several different levels of reason that makes people flee. But it's very often also linked to lack of governance. In many countries, people don't feel safe because they are under maybe attacked by a neighboring village, because they are disagreeing on the rights for cattle and so on. So there's a number of different reasons that can make people have to flee. And UNHCR and the refugee regime steps in when people cross a border and say, I had to flee from my life. And that's where, in a way, the refugee protection starts, assessing what was the reasons for coming and so on. But these situations coexist, just as you mentioned yourself, with people who are migrating. Not necessarily because their life is in danger, but more because they feel their life is in need of improvement, or because they would like to have more opportunities, or because they feel that the development that is happening in their country is not going fast enough. And that's a coexisting flow as well, and factor that influences what we can call people on the move.
Yeah, thank you. So could you describe quite briefly that how the process is going when the UNHCR, which is the UN refugee agency, is dealing with these problems and issues that we have? There are like approximately 27 million refugees and a lot of other people that they are forced. So how is the process of engaging with those people and help them?
Well, there is not one answer, not a simple answer.
Yeah.
When you said do it very fast, there is not a simple answer to your question. But let me just say that in a way, UNHCR was created initially just to create the legal framework for which states could sign up and become parties to the agreement. And today, 160 states have signed up. And the role initially was foreseen just for us to say, here is a framework, these are the rights and rules, here are the rules of the game, now you governments manage it. Of course, what happened very quickly is that one thing is to say how you have to do it, another one is to have the capacity to do it. So UNHCR steps in when asked by governments because they feel they don't have the capacity fully to manage refugee situations. So of course, in very large inflows that happens very suddenly, a government may quickly be overwhelmed and therefore needs support from UNHCR. And we then work not alone, not just with ourselves, but we work then with non-governmental organizations, NGOs, like Médecins Sans Frontières, Oxfam, Swedish organizations, Kvinna to Kvinna, and others. And they are then helping all together in trying to bring a state of normalcy. In refugee affairs, there is different stages. One is the critical emergency phase, the first couple of weeks, but then there is more phases and so on, stabilization and trying to find for solutions and so on. So many different steps that it goes through.
Thank you. So there is one perception, or maybe to put it more correctly and accurately, that's misperception, I may say it, is that some people, they think that almost all of the refugees or immigrants from the developing and middle countries, they come to Western countries, especially Europe or European Union and North America, while the data and statistics from UNHCR shows that almost 85% of refugees and immigrants, they stay in the same, not in the same that they say in developing and like middle income countries. So why do you think that there is such a misperception?
Well, you're very right. So first of all, let's remember the facts. As you say, 85% are staying in what we call developing countries or low income to middle income countries. And these countries are shouldering an enormous burden, you can say, and responsibility, not for themselves, but also on behalf of the international community. And this is a very, very important role. When you then talk about how is the West reacting, I think we need to reflect on domestic politics. It hasn't always been like that. This is something that has emerged over the last 10, 20 years in different countries. And it's not so much neglecting that people can be refugees. It's a question of where should they be held. And this is a big debate now in many European countries saying, couldn't refugees just be held somewhere else? And where our organization has always promoted that the right to asylum is an important right that we need to safeguard. And anybody who comes to the door and says, I need asylum, should have their claim assessed in a good and fair way. So, but it is challenged, as you say, and it is also challenged because there is not everybody who comes to claim asylum is a refugee, as you also know. So for instance, last year in Sweden, a quite high percentage, after they had assessed everything, were not deemed to qualify as refugees. So that also shows that, of course, many factors are on the move, and therefore in the population as well, sometimes there is a confusion and conflation about why are people moving and why are they coming. But it's a complex problem, and it's a problem that is requiring a multi-factor, a multi-spectrum response for sure.
And could we also say that because before 2015 and 16, most of the European countries, including Sweden, they had quite relatively friendly immigration policies, but afterwards their migration policies and other rules and regulations changed dramatically, become more restrictive and like hard, especially for people to seek, apply for asylum and be recognized as asylums or refugees. So, and that shift not only has been here in Sweden, but also in other, even on the EU level.
Exactly.
So, is it only politics, or there are also other factors? And how it has challenged the operations of UNHCR and the commitment of UNHCR to help refugees?
Sure, well, that's a good question as well. Let me just say that I think the challenge of the policies changing and becoming more restricted is a result of the fact that countries who are neighboring each other cannot find a common agreement. And that's why we've been promoting that within the European Union, we should try to find a common agreement with all the European Union states to try to have a common way of looking at it. That has been a bit stalemate since the last 2015. And now another progress is on the way. We hope it will be more successful. But it just shows that that's one phenomenon of that. When you say how it has affected UNHCR, when we have all these discussions with countries in the West about tough policies or trying to block refugees from coming, or lately as in the United Kingdom, let's send refugees to Rwanda or asylum seekers to Rwanda, which also is being discussed in Denmark. What we are warning about is that be careful here. This is, first of all, morally wrong, it's legally wrong, it's ethically wrong. But in addition, it is actually undermining the efforts we have for other countries in other parts of the world to uphold protection. And we know that for a fact. Our High Commissioner was traveling a lot and meeting with a lot of government officials and presidents and prime ministers around the world. He's sometimes confronted with, well, why should I in Lebanon have so many refugees, or why should I in another country have so many refugees in Uganda if other countries are closing their doors? And therefore, it's also important for us to explain to these countries that no, they're not closing their doors, but they are playing with restrictive policies in a way that is creating this impression. And so we have always said that, listen, what we do at home matters a lot. As you know, many of the Nordic countries and also the European countries are providing a lot of funding to UNHCR. So it's not like they're not interested in refugees. But then at times there can be these challenges about also arranging your domestic policies in a way that is fully accepted. And that is a paradox that we are trying to work with the government on.
Thank you. So you did touched upon that EU wants to come to a common solution. So I think one of the solutions that they have been discussing a lot is the quota system, not through the UNHCR, but inside the EU, that when refugees come here, that they should be distributed to respective countries according to different factors that they mentioned. So do you think that such initiative and law or system, if that is being implemented in the EU, between the EU member states, is that going to be a functional and sustainable solution in order to maybe solve a part of the refugee problems that we have right now, especially when refugees come to Europe?
Well, it's you're well informed of those discussions on relocation, as we call it, and the fact is that that's not the only measure they're discussing. They are also discussing how do we manage to assess people's need for protection earlier, meaning upon entry, because clearly there is a feeling that one should not start redistributing people who have no claims to protection, but who have come for other reasons. And we've also, of course, suggested that it would be ideal if other pathways could be opened so that people could find a way to apply for jobs, maybe short-term jobs and so on, not necessarily asylum seekers or refugees, but people who could apply for that could find other legal pathways also to come to Europe and Western countries, so that we don't overburden the asylum process as the only door for everybody to come in. But as we are there at the moment, indeed, the European Union is working hard on the pact. We have said publicly that we support those activities and those plans. It's now up to the governments to negotiate it, and we'll have to see how they negotiate it out. But we do feel that a common European solution would in any case be preferable. You mentioned the word quota, but I think it's important there for your listeners to understand that that's not meant as an upper limit. It's not an upper limit quota, it's a quota of a distribution key rather, which has a different connotation to it.
Yeah, thank you. So, and there are also people that they seek for asylum in third countries through UNHCR and they wait for resettlement. For example, Indonesia, that there are people, and Uganda, and a lot of other countries. So sometimes people they say that we have been waiting for many years, more than decades. So, but they are not still resettled. And they say that maybe there is that maybe the process is not transparent or there's an issue or problem. So would you like to just talk about this a little bit and say?
Yeah, sure. It's a definitely a difficult problem for those who are waiting for so long, because resettlement is not available to very many. Last year, I think we had 70,000 refugees leaving. You mentioned the numbers yourself, 27 million. So it is only available for a very tiny portion. And sometimes new crises come on top and replaces the others. So for instance, when the Ukraine situation happened, clearly countries were talking about, well, now we need to use some of those places for the last emergency. When the Afghan situation happened in last year in August, people were also looking at how can we use resettlement for that. And that you can say was maybe not fair for those who have been waiting in Uganda for 7, 8, 9 years. But it's not, the waiting is not really, it's a very strict criteria as well. And sometimes maybe there are expectations and hopes to resettlement that may not be realistic for all. And that's what we try to communicate, but that can be very difficult, especially if people feel that they're living a very difficult life in the country of asylum. And that's also why we try to work as much as we can, improving the conditions there, trying to make people enjoy rights and trying to make people engage in meaningful self-reliance so they can be self-sufficient. And if they can be that, hopefully that can give meaning to their lives, they can support their children and the children can go to school. But it's one big solution, and it must be very frustrating to feel when you don't have that. It must be very discouraging, and we feel with the refugees. But those places are not ours. Those places are governments who are offering them. Sweden is offering very forcefully a quota that really has helped us tremendously. It's somewhat bigger than the one in Norway, but Norway is coming a close second. And then now the United States and Canada is back with quite robust quotas as well, way beyond what the European Union is offering. But so who knows? Maybe we'll see a little bit more, but resettlement will never be the real solution to refugees.
Yeah, maybe to conclude this interview, I want to ask this question: that what does UNHCR expect from young people when it comes to tackle the refugee crisis or issue, or what role can the young generation play, because they are who will decide tomorrow?
Sure, thank you, Arif. That's a great question, and I think what we increasingly, when we in my office we discuss it, we really say that, well, politics are looking so difficult. If you look at the opinion polls, a certain group seems to be very negative and so on. So we should work with the youth for sure. And the youth is in a way energizing the youth for the issues, energizing for the understanding, for the cross-cultural meetings. UNHCR is not doing all of that, as you know, in the Nordic countries. That's not our role, but it is happening. And I think the organizations in the civil society, in the civil samhället in Sweden who is doing that, are playing a very important factor to try to build that together. And if it can create the understanding in the youth that this work is important, that this helping refugees is important, that we also can hopefully soon find more solutions that allows refugees to go home to their countries in a good way, in a safe way, which we have not had in many years, right? Many of these situations have not found a solution. Think about Syria. We have 10-year-olds who live Syria who now are 22 years old today and never have lived outside Syria for that long. That's of course a situation where then they in a way more integrated now in their new country and would find it very difficult to return. And many have already received permanent residence or so on in many countries. But it is that, I think you're right, working with the youth and what you're doing with Ung in Media, I think can help bring that understanding. So thanks for putting a spotlight and thanks for your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks a
Pleasure
lot.
to have you.
Pleasure,
Thank you.
Ray. Thanks so much.